In this lesson, we will look closely at three important parts of the British Empire: Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and Ireland. All began as British colonies, but over the course of the 1800s and 1900s achieved self-rule. We will first examine Canada, which was deeply influenced by conflict between French and English settlers. Next, we will examine Australia, which began as a penal colony where criminals from England would be sent for punishment. Australia, and its neighbor New Zealand, eventually grew in population as people settled there to take advantage of the good soil and climate. Ireland, as we will see, had a more troubled history because of the intense conflict between the Catholics and Protestants, and the brutal exploitation of the Irish peasantry by the English. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand were all British colonies at the beginning of the 19th century, yet by the early 1900s, these territories would all have self-rule. These territories gained freedom from colonial rule much faster and easier than British colonies in Africa or Asia. This happened for several reasons. First, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand all developed wealthy and well-educated elites who were able to effectively push for independence. Second, the language and cultural roots the colonists shared with Britain helped promote peaceful negotiation and change. Finally, racial attitudes played a part. Imperialists in nations like Britain felt that whites, who formed the majority of the population in places like Canada because of the displacement of native peoples, were more capable of governing themselves than non-whites. Canada's history as a British colony began when France lost the territory in 1763 as a result of the French and Indian War. The territory created a problem for Britain, which now had to deal with thousands of French-speaking Catholics in its American empire. After the American Revolution in the 1780s, thousands of Loyalists fled to Canada. Combined with immigrants from Britain, this created a sizable population of English-speaking Protestants in Canada. In addition, in the 1790s, several groups of Native American peoples still lived in eastern Canada, while others in the west and north had little or no contact with Europeans. To ease ethnic and religious tensions, Britain passed the Constitutional Act of 1791. The act created two provinces, an English-speaking Upper Canada in what is today Ontario, and a French-speaking Lower Canada in what is today Quebec. French traditions and the Catholic Church were protected in Lower Canada, while English traditions and laws guided Upper Canada. Despite the division, unrest grew in both provinces during the 1800s. The people of Upper Canada resented the power held by a small group of elites who controlled the colonial government. Lower Canada had similar problems. In 1837, discontent flared into rebellion in both places. The British had learned from their experience with the American Revolution. While they hurried to put down the disorder, they sent an able politician, Lord Durham, to compile a report on the causes of the unrest. Durham recommended that Parliament reunite Canada, but encourage more English people to emigrate to the colony. He also suggested giving the colonists more control over their own domestic affairs. In 1840, Parliament acted on some of Durham's recommendations by passing the Act of Union. The Act joined the two Canadas into one province. It also granted them an elected legislature that could determine some domestic policies. Britain still controlled foreign policy and trade, however. In the mid-1800s, thousands of English, Scottish, and Irish people immigrated to Canada in the hope of exploiting its ample farmland and natural resources. As the country grew, Canadian leaders urged the British government to approve turning Canada into a confederation by uniting all of Britain's North American colonies: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, British Columbia, and the united Upper and Lower Canadas. Canadian leaders felt that greater unity would strengthen the new nation against the rapidly expanding United States to the south and help Canada's economic development. Britain finally passed the British North America Act of 1867. The act created the Dominion of Canada. A dominion is a self-governing nation. As a dominion, Canada had its own parliament, modeled on that of Britain. By 1900, Canada also had some control over its own foreign policy. Still, Canada maintained close ties with Britain. Like the United States, Canada expanded westward in the late 1800s. Again, like the United States, the development of the railroad promoted this expansion and encouraged the development of the economy. In 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railway opened, linking eastern and western Canada. Wherever the railroad went, settlers followed. It moved people and products, such as timber and manufactured goods, across the country. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, more immigrants flooded into Canada from Germany, Italy, Poland, Russia, China, and Japan. Many of these immigrants sought to escape political problems at home and find freedom and new economic opportunities in North America. One group that did not benefit from the westward expansion of Canada was the Native American community. As in the United States, westward expansion destroyed the way of life of Native Americans in Canada. Most were forced to sign treaties giving up their lands. Some resisted, such as the revolt in central Canada of the Métis, people of mixed Native American and French-Canadian ancestry, in the mid-1800s. Many Métis were French-speaking Catholics who believed that the government was trying to take their land and destroy their language and religion. Government troops successfully put down these uprisings. The Dutch in the 1600s were the first Europeans to reach Australia, but the territory was claimed for Britain in 1770 by the daring Captain James Cook. For a time, however, Australia was too far away to attract European settlers, and Britain was distracted by the American Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. Like most regions claimed by imperialist powers, Australia had long been inhabited by other people. Australia's indigenous people were called Aborigines, a word used by Europeans to denote the earliest people to live in a place. Isolated from the larger world, the Aborigines lived in small hunting and food-gathering bands, much as their Stone Age ancestors had. Aboriginal groups spoke as many as 250 distinct languages. As in other parts of the world, when the first white settlers arrived in Australia, it began a process of displacement and suffering for the Aborigines. Australia became more important to Britain in the late 1700s. To relieve overcrowding in British prisons and reduce the burden on the state, during the 1700s, Britain had sent convicts to its North American colonies, especially to Georgia. The American Revolution closed that outlet, and by the late 1700s, Britain once again faced terrible overcrowding in its prisons. Britain decided to make Australia a penal colony, or a place where convicted criminals are sent to be punished. The first British ships, carrying about 700 convicts, arrived in Botany Bay in Australia in 1788. The people who survived the grueling 8-month voyage faced more hardships on shore. Many were debtors and petty criminals who had spent their entire lives in the city. They had few of the skills that were necessary in a harsh new wilderness environment. Under the brutal discipline of guards, work gangs cleared land for settlement and prepared fields for farming. By the early 1800s, Britain saw economic benefit in Australia's vast size and natural resources. Free citizens were encouraged to emigrate to Australia with offers of cheap land and tools. A prosperous wool industry grew up as settlers found that the land and climate suited the herding of sheep. In the 1850s, the discovery of gold in eastern Australia brought a rush of new settlers eager to strike it rich. Many of these gold hunters stayed on to become ranchers and farmers. They pushed into the rugged interior of the continent, known as the Outback, carving out huge ranches for sheep and cattle, and farms for growing wheat. As the rapidly growing population spread out across Australia, they displaced or killed the Aborigines. Like Canada, Australia was originally made up of separate colonies scattered around the continent. Britain worried about the vulnerability of Australia to other European powers. To counter this threat and to boost Australia's economic development, Britain responded to Australian demands for self-rule. In 1901, Britain helped the colonies unite into the independent Commonwealth of Australia. The new country kept its ties to Britain by recognizing the British monarch as its head of state. The Australian Constitution drew on both British and American models. Unlike Britain and the United States, Australia quickly granted women the right to vote. It had also been the first country to adopt the secret ballot in 1856. To the southeast of Australia lies New Zealand. In 1769, Captain Cook claimed its islands for Britain. Missionaries landed there in 1814 to convert the indigenous people, the Maori, to Christianity. Unlike Australia, where the Aborigines were spread thinly across a large continent, the Maori were concentrated in a smaller area. The Maoris were settled farmers and had more organization and technology than the Aborigines of Australia. The Maoris were a proud people and were determined to defend their land against foreign invasion. White settlers, who were attracted by New Zealand's mild climate and good soil, followed the missionaries in the 1800s. As they had done in Australia, these settlers introduced sheep and cattle and were soon exporting wool, mutton, and beef. In 1840, Britain annexed New Zealand. As colonists poured in and set up large ranches and farms, their hunger for land led to fierce wars with the Maori. From the 1840s through the 1870s, brutal conflicts erupted between the two groups, and many Maori died in these struggles. Many other Maori perished as a result of disease, alcoholism, and poverty. By the end of the 1800s, resistance had crumbled, and the Maori population had fallen to less than 50,000. Like settlers in Australia and Canada, white New Zealanders sought self-rule. In 1907, they won self-rule and set up their own parliament. Like Canada and Australia, New Zealand also preserved close ties to the British Empire. New Zealand pioneered many political and social reforms. For example, it was the first nation to give women the right to vote. Unlike Canada and Australia, where reform and independence came relatively peacefully, Ireland's path to self-rule was filled with violence and bloodshed. The English conquered Ireland in the 1100s, and in the 1600s, Protestant English and Scottish settlers colonized Ireland and took possession of the best farmland. The Catholic Irish majority resented English rule and these settlers, many of whom became absentee landlords who owned land in Ireland but resided in England, so that rents and fees paid by Irish farmers went to England instead of benefiting their own country. Many Irish Catholics lived in desperate poverty because they had to pay high rents to English landlords and high tithes to support the official state Anglican Church. Irish Catholics could not vote or hold public office. The English looked at the Irish as wild and uncivilized, and often treated them with the same racist attitudes as Africans and Asians. Under these conditions, resistance and rebellion were common. Like the nationalist minorities in other European empires, Irish nationalists campaigned vigorously for freedom and justice throughout the 1800s. Nationalist leader Daniel O'Connell, nicknamed the Liberator, organized an Irish Catholic League and held mass meetings to demand repeal of unfair laws. Under pressure from O'Connell and other Irish nationalists, Britain slowly moved to improve conditions in Ireland. In 1829, Parliament passed the Catholic Emancipation Act, which allowed Irish Catholics to vote and hold political office. Yet many injustices remained. Absentee landlords could evict tenants almost at will. Other British laws still forbade the teaching and speaking of the Irish language. Life for Irish peasants slightly improved with the introduction of the potato, which was cheap, nutritious, and relatively easy to grow. Between 1781 and 1845, the Irish population doubled from 4 to 8 million, with probably over half that number depending on the potato for survival. In 1845, however, Ireland's potatoes were hit by a fungus that made them inedible. The resulting Great Famine decimated the Irish population. Landlords evicted tenants who could not pay their rents. British officials made almost no effort to help the Irish, and many refused to provide any relief for the starving people. The Great Famine further intensified Irish resentment of British rule. Irish nationalists blamed the suffering and hardship on British policies and pushed even harder for Irish rights and freedom. The human costs of the Irish famine were devastating. As can be seen in the graph, more than 1 million people died, accounting for about 12% of the population. Another 2 million emigrated, most of them traveling to the United States, while others went to Canada, Britain, and Australia. Even after the famine ended in 1851, millions more Irish left their home as poverty, disease, and exploitation by English landlords continued to take a toll on the population. In the 1870s, moderate Irish nationalists rallied around a rousing leader named Charles Stewart Parnell. As a member of Parliament, Parnell pressed for home rule, or local self-government for Ireland. Although Parnell's efforts led to some reforms, he was brought down by a personal scandal and failed to win home rule for his people. Throughout the 1800s, Britain faced the ever-present Irish question. This phrase was used by British politicians to describe the problem posed by growing nationalism and demands for independence for Ireland. The Irish question became so divisive that at times the government could not take care of other business. Conservatives resisted any concessions to the Irish because they feared that if Ireland were granted independence, the Protestant minority in the country would face discrimination. They also thought that making concessions to the Irish would show weakness that might encourage nationalist groups in other parts of the British Empire. The Liberal Party under Gladstone was more sympathetic to the Irish. Gladstone succeeded in passing bills that ended the use of Irish money to support the Anglican Church, and tried to ease the hardships of the Irish tenant farmers. New laws prevented profit-hungry landlords from charging unfair rents, and protected the rights of tenants to the land they worked. In 1914, Parliament finally passed a Home Rule Bill for Ireland, but the outbreak of World War I caused the proposal to be postponed. This delay deeply frustrated Irish nationalists. In response to the postponement of Home Rule, militant Irish leaders launched a revolt against British rule on Easter Sunday in 1916. Although the Easter Uprising was quickly suppressed and its leaders executed, it stirred wider support for the Irish cause. Frustrated by the British government's delays in granting more freedom to Ireland after World War I, Irish nationalists formed an underground government and militia called the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, that began a series of violent attacks against British officials in Ireland. In 1921, Britain granted Home Rule to Southern Ireland, while Ulster, or Northern Ireland, remained part of Great Britain. After World War II, an exhausted British government took no action when Irish nationalists declared Southern Ireland the free and independent Republic of Ireland in 1949. The northern part remained part of the United Kingdom. Now that we have completed this lesson, examine the questions on this slide. After I finish speaking, pause the video and see if you can answer them based on what you have heard. Use this as a way to help you review for the assessments.